Scott Mooney and I have just completed a study in which we want to set the record straight on Tabor in Colorado and Tabor in Maine. And Scott's going to talk about Tabor in Maine. I'm going to talk about Tabor in Colorado. What Tabor has done for Colorado is basically allow government to grow at the same rate as the private sector. When Tabor was passed, since Tabor was passed, government spending has tripled in Colorado. Government spending has increased every year since Tabor was passed. But government has grown at the same rate as our personal income. Income per capita has grown about 30%. State spending per capita has grown about 28%. So this is what Tabor does. It allows government to grow at the same rate as your private sector. We've done that without increasing taxes, without increasing debt, and without the kinds of fiscal problems that you're facing here in Maine. In fact, what Tabor has done is set the stage for rebating significant amounts of revenue to taxpayers. We have rebated $3.25 billion of money to taxpayers. We have also cut taxes. Believe it or not, you can cut taxes. It is possible. We have cut the income tax, the property tax, the business personal property tax, the sales tax. We have returned $3.5 billion in tax cuts to taxpayers. So roughly $6.7 billion in money has been put back into taxpayers' pockets. Now the great thing about the Tabor story in Colorado is that it has created one of the best business tax climates in the country. We are attracting business investment and jobs from all over the country. Our population is growing. Colorado's economy is growing better than just about every other state in this country right now. A lot of it is because of Tabor, of the way in which we've been able to constrain the growth of government. Now what Tabor also says is if any jurisdiction, state or local, wants to raise taxes, issue debt, or spend surplus money, all they have to do is ask voters. And we've been doing this in Colorado since 1992. We've had hundreds of ballot issues in which governments ask voters, should we raise taxes? Should we issue more debt? Can we spend surplus revenue? Now it turns out that at the local level, these pass frequently. If it's a very small district where a government says we need a library or we need a fire engine, those tend to pass. At the municipal level, they pass about half the time. At the state level, the state has asked Colorado citizens to raise taxes a number of times unsuccessfully. The state has also asked Colorado citizens, can we spend surplus revenue rather than rebate it to taxpayers? In 1998, the voters turned them down. In 2005, they put a measure on the ballot, Referendum C, which would allow the state to spend the surplus revenue for 5 years. And voters approved that. And so for a 5-year period, we have a timeout in which the state is spending this surplus revenue. Ref C also changed our Tabor amendment to eliminate the ratchet effect. Basically, from 2011 on, government will grow at the rate of inflation and population growth each year. That's the limit on the growth of government spending. Tabor is alive and well in Colorado. Voters approve Tabor at a higher ratio now than when it passed in 1992. When I served on our tax commission, we did a survey. And we asked citizens in Colorado, should the government spending be constrained by the Tabor limit? Should the government have to rebate surplus above that to taxpayers? Should voters have to approve increased taxes, increased debt, or expenditure of surplus revenue? What voters tell us, at a 70% ratio, we approve. We want this type of constraint. We want citizens in Colorado to decide how much government do we want and how much government are we willing to pay for. We think that if any state needs this, it's Maine. Maine, the record on your fiscal policies basically is disastrous, because what you've allowed is unconstrained growth of spending. You've allowed government to grow much more rapidly than the private sector. And the result of this is higher debt, increased taxes, $300 million more in taxes since the last Tabor measure was presented, 58% increase in property taxes. Unfortunately, the sad part of your story is you've created one of the worst business tax climates in this country. Businesses and people are leaving this state with good reason. We think the Tabor proposed for Maine can turn this around. We think Tabor in Maine can do the same thing it's done in Colorado, and that's keep government growing in line with the private sector. Not more rapidly than the private sector, but allow government to grow with the private sector. That should set the stage for tax cuts, and it should set the stage for tax rebates. And you should begin putting some of the surplus revenue back in the pockets of taxpayers. And in the process, you'll create a much better business climate, and instead of businesses and people leaving the state, you'll start to attract businesses and people to come back to a state because you create a good business tax climate. We also think that there's plenty of evidence that Maine citizens want this Tabor. You've had a citizens veto which basically rejected a tax increase last year. The citizens are saying we are fed up with higher taxes in Maine. You now have a measure that allows citizens to vote on school budgets. We think that citizens in Maine want to have the same power over fiscal policies as we have in Colorado. Citizens in Maine want to vote on tax increases, debt increases, and expenditure of surplus revenue. You have a strong tradition of this in Maine, especially in your local government level. Let's get government back in the hands of citizens in Maine. You need to pass this Tabor amendment. So let me turn it over to David and